Ladies and gentlemen, you ever hear someone say, "Hi, what's up?" And you just know they don't really care. It's empty, it's weak, it's forgettable, and the worst part, it leads nowhere. But today I'm going to give you something different, something that makes people stop, that makes them listen, that makes them remember you. Three words that will make the difference between blending in and standing out. But first, let me tell you a story. There was a man, brilliant, hardworking, talented, but when he walked into rooms, nobody noticed him. He greeted people the way everyone does. "Hey, what's up?" And guess what? Nobody cared. Then one day, someone gave him advice. They said, "Stop being predictable. Stop being forgettable. Instead, say something that matters." So he changed, and everything changed with him. Instead of "Hi, what's up?" he started saying, "How are you?" And he meant it. "Tell me more," because people want to be heard. "I appreciate you," because nobody hears that enough. And just like that, he became the man people wanted to talk to, the man people remembered, the man who made connections, not conversations. So today I challenge you, the next time you're about to say, "What's up?" stop, take a breath, and say something that matters. Because words, they're not just sounds, they're not just habits. Words create worlds, and the world is watching. Make them remember you. Thank you. Start strong. Grab attention immediately. The first words out of your mouth need to land like a punch, sharp, intentional, unforgettable. If the audience isn't hooked in the first 10 seconds, you've already lost them. That's the reality. Because in a world full of distractions, where attention spans are shrinking, people don't have time for hesitation. They don't have time for weak openings, for small talk, for uncertainty. They need to feel something right away. Think about the great speeches, the great moments in history. They never started with, "Hey, so today I'm going to talk about something interesting." No. They started with power, with authority, with weight. Martin Luther King Jr. didn't walk up and say, "So I want to talk about dreams today." No, he looked out at the crowd and said, "I have a dream." Right away, he pulled people in. Right away, they felt something, and that's exactly what you need to do. Whether you're speaking to an audience of 1,000 or one person in a room, your words should hit with force. You should make people sit up, make them lean in, make them forget their phones, their distractions, their wandering thoughts. Because in that moment, you own the room. How do you do that? It starts with certainty. Whatever you're about to say it like you mean it. Not like you're asking for permission, not like you're checking if the audience is interested. Say it like the words have weight, like they've been burning inside you, waiting to be spoken. Picture this. Two people walk into a room. One mumbles, "Hey everyone, I just wanted to say a few things real quick." The other steps forward, looks around and says, "Listen up. Who do you think people are going to pay attention to?" It's not about volume. It's not about screaming or being dramatic. It's about presence. It's about the energy you bring into the space before you even say a word. It's about carrying yourself in a way that says, "I belong here. You need to hear this." And when you do speak, start with impact. Start with a statement that makes people think, a question that makes them wonder, a story that makes them lean in. If you're giving a speech about leadership, don't start with a definition. Start with a challenge. Most people think they're leaders. They're not. And by the time I'm done talking, you'll know whether you are or you aren't. If you're speaking about change, don't start with statistics. Start with something that hits home. The world you knew yesterday, it's gone. And the question is, are you ready for the one coming next? See, words matter. The way you deliver them matters. Because the moment you open your mouth, you're either gaining attention or losing it. And once it's gone, it's nearly impossible to get back. Let me tell you a story. Years ago, I watched two speakers go back to back at an event. The first one walked up, smiled nervously, and started with, "Hi everyone, I'm really excited to be here today. Thanks for having me." And you know what happened? Half the audience checked their phones. A few people shifted in their seats. That energy, gone. The second speaker walked up, paused, looked around and said, "Most of you in this room are making a mistake you don't even realize, and it's costing you every single day." Silence. Not a single person moved. He had them. See the difference? It wasn't about who had the better content. It was about who demanded attention, who refused to let people drift off, who walked onto that stage and made it theirs. And you have that same ability. It doesn't matter if you're nervous. It doesn't matter if you don't feel like the most experienced person in the room. What matters is how you carry yourself, how you own your words. So the next time you have something to say, don't ease into it. Don't start with hesitation. Start with power. Start like you mean it. Because in those first few seconds, you're not just speaking, you're making them listen. People don't remember facts. They don't remember statistics. They remember stories. They remember the way a moment made them feel. That's why, if you want to connect, if you want to make people listen, not just hear, but truly listen, you need to tell a story. Not just any story, not something rehearsed and polished until it sounds fake, not something borrowed from a book just because it fits your message. It has to be your story, real, honest, something that carries truth in it. Because people can feel authenticity. They know when you're being real, and they know when you're just talking to talk. Think about it. The most powerful speeches, the ones that stick with us, the ones we quote and revisit, all have one thing in common. They tell a story that matters. Because when you tell a story, people don't just understand what you're saying. They see it. They feel it. They imagine themselves inside that moment with you. And that's how you move them. That's how you make them remember. Let me give you an example. Imagine I'm talking about failure. I could stand here and say, failure is a part of life. Everyone fails. The key is to keep going. That's true, but it's forgettable. You've heard it 100 times. It doesn't make you feel anything. But what if instead I told you this? Years ago, I walked into a room full of people who expected me to fail. I could see it in their faces. I could hear it in their voices. And when I stood up to speak, my hands were shaking. My heart was racing. I opened my mouth and the words stuck. Silence. Complete, awkward, painful silence. And in that moment, I wanted to disappear. I wanted to walk out of that room and never come back. But I didn't. I wanted to watch and work in the program and shut the portal anymore. My mother looked at me to see if I still feared her. And in that moment, she saw fear. I took a breath. I steadied myself. And I spoke. Now you're paying attention. Now you feel something. You see the moment in your head, and when I finally deliver the lesson, you believe it, because I didn't just tell you, I showed you. That's the power of storytelling. But it only works if you tell the right kind of story, the kind that carries weight, the kind that speaks to a universal truth that everyone in the audience can relate to. Your story doesn't have to be dramatic. It doesn't have to be extraordinary. It just has to be real. A story about fear, about doubt, about falling and getting back up, a story about trying and failing, a story about a moment that changed you. That's what people connect with, because no matter who they are, where they're from, or what they believe, they've been there too. Now, here's the mistake most people make when telling a story. They drag it out. They add too much detail. They get lost in the setup and forget the punchline. Don't do that. The best stories are sharp. They're tight. They go straight to the heart of the moment. Start in the middle, right where the tension is. If you're telling a story about learning resilience, don't spend 10 minutes talking about what you had for breakfast that day. Get to the moment, the struggle, the decision that changed you. And then, when the story has them, when they're fully locked in, that's when you give them the lesson. That's when you bring it home. Because the lesson always hits harder when it's wrapped in a story. Think about the stories that shaped you, the ones that stayed with you long after you heard them, the ones that made you think, that could be me. That's what you're trying to create, that moment of recognition, that moment where your story becomes their story. Because when you do that, when you make them feel something, they don't just listen. When they remember. Repetition is one of the most powerful tools in communication. When used right, it can drive a point home with such intensity that it becomes ingrained in your audience's mind. But too many people underestimate its power. They think that once they've made a point, they can move on. But the truth is, the most effective messages are those that are repeated, reinforced, and re-emphasized until they resonate deeply. Think about the greatest speeches in history. Think about the moments that made people remember. Did they just say something once and leave it at that? Absolutely not. They repeated their core message, sometimes subtly, sometimes not so subtly, but they made sure their audience heard it more than once. And here's why. People forget. It doesn't matter how good your message is. It doesn't matter how passionate you are. People will forget. But if you drive that message home over and over, if you emphasize it, if you come back to it again and again, it becomes part of their thinking. It sticks. Repetition works because it gives people a chance to absorb and internalize your words. Think of it like this. The first time they hear something, they might think, okay, that's interesting. The second time, they start processing it, maybe questioning it. But by the third or fourth time, something clicks. They start seeing the depth of what you're saying. Take a moment and think about some of the most iconic phrases you've heard. I have a dream. Yes, we can. Make America great again. These aren't just phrases that were said once. These are phrases that were repeated in countless speeches, interviews, rallies, and conversations. Each time they were said, the message became clearer, stronger, and more embedded in people's minds. But repetition doesn't mean just saying the same thing over and over. It means emphasizing. It means saying the same core idea with different words, different angles, different energy. You can say, you have what it takes, then later say, don't let anyone tell you you can't. You can say, this is your moment, then follow up with, this is your time to shine. Both are different, but both are saying the same thing. They hit from different directions, so the message sticks. In a speech, you don't just repeat the same line like a broken record. You repeat your core message through the framework of the ideas, the stories, the examples, and the calls to action you present. If the idea is about overcoming challenges, tell a story about a struggle. Then come back to the idea, you are stronger than you think. Then, remind them again. Don't let challenges define you. You define them. Repeat it in different forms, and by the end of your speech, your audience is living that message. But repetition isn't just about frequency, it's also about emphasis. You have to know when to pause, when to slow down, when to lean in, when to repeat something not just with words, but with feeling. The most powerful repetitions come with intent. When you say something twice or three times, you're not just doing it because you've forgotten the first one. You're doing it because you want to make sure they hear it. You want to make sure it hits deep enough to stay with them. You see this in great speeches. Martin Luther King Jr. didn't just say, I have a dream once. He said it multiple times, each time with more power, more intensity. The repetition wasn't a crutch. It was a way to build momentum, to stir the crowd, to make them believe. The same goes for you. Every time you repeat a message, you're reinforcing it, making sure that it settles into your audience's hearts and minds. Another reason repetition is so effective is because of human nature. People are forgetful, but they're also creatures of habit. If they hear something multiple times, it starts to feel familiar. And when something feels familiar, it starts to feel comfortable. It becomes accepted. That's when they begin to internalize it and act on it. But here's the key. Don't just repeat for the sake of it. Repeat with purpose. Every time you go back to your core message, it should feel different. It should feel stronger. Each repetition should add weight, add meaning, until your audience can't help but feel it. When you can repeat your message with power and purpose, you don't just inform your audience, you transform them. You change how they think, how they act, how they approach their challenges, their lives, their work. That's the power of repetition. That's how you ensure that when your speech ends, your message doesn't. So, the next time you speak, remember this. Repetition isn't redundancy, it's reinforcement. And when you use it right, you make sure that your words are not only heard, but remembered. When you step onto any stage, or even into a conversation, you're not just there to speak. You're there to move people, to inspire them, challenge them, and ultimately, to make them do something. But here's the truth. Speaking without a call to action is like telling someone a great story and then walking away without offering them the chance to be part of it. It's like showing them the path, but not encouraging them to take the first step. A speech isn't just an opportunity to share your thoughts, it's a moment to ignite change. You've spent time getting your message across, sharing your wisdom, your stories, and your insights. Now, the most important part is this. What do you want them to do with it? This is where the call to action comes in. A powerful call to action is more than just a suggestion. It's a challenge. It's a demand that leaves the audience with no excuse but to act. It's the moment when they feel the weight of what you've said and they understand that inaction is no longer an option. Think about it. When you listen to a great speech, how do you feel afterward? Do you leave with a sense of clarity about what comes next? Or do you just walk out thinking, that was good, but now what? You see, a call to action does the work of closing that gap. It tells your audience, this is what you do next. It creates a sense of urgency. It creates momentum. Now, how do you craft a call to action that sticks? First, it has to be specific. A vague suggestion like take some time to think about it doesn't get anyone anywhere. But when you say, I challenge you to make one change in your life today and start with this one action, you're not just speaking words, you're presenting them with a clear direction. You're making them see that change isn't this distant abstract thing. It's something they can start right now. And that's the key. A call to action has to be actionable. It has to be something they can do, not tomorrow, not next week, but today. Otherwise, it risks fading into the ether, like so many good intentions that get lost in the noise of daily life. But don't just stop at specifics. Make your call to action feel personal. Tie it back to something in your message, something that speaks directly to your audience's needs, their desires, their pain points. If your message is about personal growth, your call to action shouldn't just be start growing. It should be something like, take that one risk today. Call that person. Take that leap you've been putting off. When you make it personal, when you tie the call to action back to something that resonates deeply with your audience, you don't just move them, you compel them to act. They no longer feel like passive listeners, they feel like active participants. A great call to action also taps into the emotion of the moment. This is where you harness the energy of your speech, the emotions you've stirred, the stories you've shared, the passion you've poured into your words, and channel it into the next step. If you've made them feel inspired, if you've made them feel empowered, then give them the tools to carry that feeling into the world. And here's the secret to a powerful call to action. It's not just about getting people to act. It's about getting them to believe they can. People often need permission to act. They need validation. They need a push, a nudge, a spark to overcome the doubts, fears, and uncertainties holding them back. So your call to action should not only show them what to do, but also make them believe they're capable of doing it. That's where the power of your words comes in. By the time you give your audience that challenge, that directive, they should feel ready. They should feel like they're not just hearing words, but receiving an invitation. You're inviting them into something bigger than themselves. Think about the great leaders, the great speakers. Their calls to action weren't just about moving people physically. They were about moving them mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. They understood that change doesn't happen just because someone says, here's what you should do. It happens when people believe they can make a difference, when they feel that spark inside them that says, this is my moment, I have what it takes. And that's your job as a speaker. You're not just there to talk, you're there to ignite that spark, to give people the belief that they can take the next step, that they can change, that they can grow. And when you deliver a call to action that's specific, personal, and full of belief, you're giving them the one thing they need to move forward, confidence. So remember this. Speak with urgency, speak with purpose, and when it's time for the call to action, make it clear, make it personal, and make it something that challenges your audience to not just hear your words, but to live them. The most powerful speeches don't just communicate, they linger. They stay with the audience long after the last word is spoken. The reason for that isn't just the content or the delivery or the passion. It's the way the speaker leaves a lasting imprint on the hearts and minds of their listeners. And that imprint, that memory, comes from the closing moments of the speech, the final words that stick like glue. This is why your ending matters just as much, if not more, than the beginning. It's your chance to leave your audience with something that'll echo in their thoughts long after they've left the room. You see, too many speakers rush the end. They've delivered their message, they've told their stories, and then, as if it's all over, they simply thank everyone and walk off. But that's a mistake. A great ending doesn't just wind things down, it elevates everything you've already said. It brings all the emotions, all the lessons, all the energy you've created into one powerful, unforgettable moment. It's the moment where you make sure that your message is not only heard, but felt. The best speeches don't fade into the background. They resonate, they stick, and they shape the way people think long after the applause dies down. A great ending is the final brushstroke that completes the painting. It's the last piece of the puzzle that makes everything come together. So, How do you craft that unforgettable ending? First, it's about clarity. Don't leave them guessing what you want them to walk away with. Be direct. Be bold. A great ending is never wishy-washy or vague. It's clear, sharp, and memorable. It wraps up the journey you've taken them on and gives them something to hold on to. Think about the most impactful speeches you've heard. They always end with something that demands attention. Whether it's a powerful quote, a call to action, or a statement that makes you pause and reflect, it's something that lingers. It's something that makes the audience go, wow, that hit me. But how do you achieve that? You achieve it by tying your ending back to the core of your message. It's not just a throwaway line, it's a reminder of everything you've just spoken about. It's the point where all the threads you've woven together throughout your speech come together in a brilliant, clear conclusion. One of the most effective ways to create that memorable ending is to build on the emotion you've created. If you've inspired them, end on a note of hope. If you've made them reflect, give them a challenge. If you've stirred up a sense of urgency, let that urgency stay with them in your last words. It's like a musician ending a song on a high note, leaving the audience with that one sound that they can't shake. The other crucial aspect of a great ending is surprise. When you deliver your final words, you want to leave the audience thinking, I didn't see that coming. It could be a twist, an unexpected turn of phrase, or a call to action that feels bold and daring. Great endings don't wrap things up too neatly. They leave a little mystery. They spark curiosity. They make people want to know more, do more, be more. When you surprise your audience, you keep them thinking long after the speech is over. It's that element of surprise that makes your words stick, that makes your message unforgettable. Another secret to a memorable ending is simplicity. Don't overcomplicate your final thoughts. The most powerful endings are often the simplest ones. A single sentence, a poignant phrase, or a clear call to action that encapsulates everything you've talked about. It's about driving home one key point, one truth, one challenge. You don't need to repeat everything you've already said. You just need to say one thing that cuts to the heart of the matter and leaves an impression. And finally, the best endings leave people feeling empowered. They make people believe that what you've shared isn't just for them to listen to, it's for them to take into their lives. A great ending doesn't just make people feel good for a moment. It makes them feel ready to act. It's the difference between hearing a great speech and doing something with what you've heard. Your final words should be an invitation, a call to arms, a declaration that the work doesn't stop when the speech ends. It carries on in the hearts and minds of those who listen to you. So don't rush your ending. Don't let the audience leave without a piece of your message etched into their mind. Make your last words count. Make them linger. Because when they do, you're not just giving a speech, you're creating a legacy of change, a legacy of inspiration, a legacy of action. And that's the true power of a great ending.